27 tons of solid gold, 30 meters high, just for the interior cladding. Bronze pillars 8 meters high, each weighing approximately 34 tons. Entire walls lined with cedar imported from Lebanon, meticulously polished cypress floors. Monumental cherubim, 4.5 meters tall, completely covered in hammered gold. Solomon's temple was not merely another architectural edifice. It became the most expensive, most imposing, and technically most advanced construction of the entire ancient era. 7 full years of uninterrupted labor were needed until its finalization, consuming more gold than any other known building of that period. However, here is the detail that intrigues specialists to this day. The rocks used in the foundations weighed up to 400 tons. This is equivalent to the weight of about 60 adult elephants, and all of this was accomplished without the aid of cranes, without metal pulleys, and without adequate wheels. The big question is how such gigantic blocks were extracted, moved, and set with millimeter precision approximately 3,000 years ago. Contemporary engineers analyzed the data and simply cannot find answers because the temple was not just colossal. It seemed to be an impossible work. In this material, you will learn about the techniques, materials, and secrets employed in that impressive construction. And in the end, you will understand why, even today, no one has managed to replicate what Solomon built. Solomon was not satisfied with common rocks. The Bible, in the first book of Kings, chapter 5, verse 17, asserts that large stones and costly stones were used for the foundations of the house of the Lord. Centuries later, archaeologists who examined the platform of the Second Temple, erected in the same location, discovered blocks that exceed 400 tons. Imagine extracting a block of this size from a mountain without dynamite, without electric saws, without any modern equipment. For this undertaking, Solomon designated 80,000 men. They operated in quarries distributed through the mountains surrounding Jerusalem. They woke up before dawn, traveled long distances, and began the riskiest task of the entire work, cutting gigantic stones. It was not feasible to simply strike the rock until it broke. After all, these were not just any stones. They needed to have perfect cuts, exact fittings, and leveled surfaces so that each block would adjust to its proper place. And there was also a divine norm that made everything even more complex. No sound of an iron tool could be heard at the construction site. This is recorded in the first book of Kings, chapter 6, verse 7. That is, each stone needed to leave the quarry completely finished. All cuts, angles, and surfaces had to be completed far from Mount Moriah, where the temple was being erected. The method used was ingenious. First, the stone cutters demarcated the surface where they wished the rock to split, scratching lines with harder stones. Then they drilled small holes along these lines, into which they inserted dry wooden wedges. Next, they poured water over them. The wood absorbed the water, expanded, and created such intense pressure that, after a few hours or days, the rock split exactly at the planned location. Without dynamite, without the noise of iron hammers, just the muffled sound of the stone dividing. But this was only the initial phase. Each block needed to be molded, polished, and measured with precision. This function belonged to experienced laborers, capable of deciphering the symbols left by the architects. In that era, there were no paper blueprints. The instructions came engraved directly on the stones, by means of signs that indicated the position of each block in the temple. An error would result in tragedy. 400 tons of stone would become useless. The work in the quarries was extremely dangerous. Cave-ins occurred. Miscalculated blocks rolled down the slope, crushing everything in their path. There was no protective equipment or hospitals nearby. Serious injuries meant minimal chances of survival. Even so, day after day, the 80,000 men returned to the quarries. For the Israelites who worked in shifts, there was remuneration and the possibility of returning home. But for the subjugated Canaanites there was no choice. The first book of Kings, chapter 9, verse 21, records that Solomon subjected them to forced labor. They cut stones because the alternative would be to face severe punishments, and cutting the stone was only the beginning. The real deadly challenge would come next. Transporting blocks of 400 tons for kilometers of mountainous terrain without any machinery. Now that the stones were cut, polished, and marked, the most dangerous stage of the entire construction arrived. Transport. How to move a block of 400 tons for kilometers across mountains without trucks, tractors, or any machinery. For this function, Solomon designated 70,000 men. Their only task was to carry and transport. The method was conceptually simple, but brutal in execution. Compacted earth ramps. The stones were placed on large tree trunks that served as rollers. Ropes of plant fiber, thick as a man's arm, were tied to the blocks. Visualize the scene. Hundreds of men holding the ropes. A supervisor shouting rhythmic orders. Pull, stop, reposition the trunks, pull again. And thus, slowly, the block advanced, sometimes just a few centimeters at a time. A single block could take weeks to travel just 5 kilometers. And even so, construction did not cease. Solomon had deadlines. The temple had to be ready in exactly 7 years. When finally a block arrived at the construction site in Jerusalem, another rule complicated things even more. There could be no sound of iron tools. If the stone was out of place, it was not permitted to hammer it to adjust it. It was necessary to pull it back, reposition the trunks, try again. Therefore, the supervisors were relentless, checking every angle, every measurement. The tension increased with every stone positioned. No errors could be made, no noise could be made. Every movement was a mixture of technical calculation and spiritual reverence. If transporting stones was already a deadly challenge, there was another gigantic problem: the wood. Solomon's temple could not be erected only with rock. Cedar from Lebanon was needed, the noblest and most coveted wood of the ancient world, famous for its durability, pleasant aroma, and natural resistance to decomposition. It was the wood used by kings to erect palaces and temples. But there was a detail. Cedar trees did not grow in Israel. They were 200 kilometers away, in the mountains of Lebanon, 200 kilometers of hostile terrain. How to transport thousands of heavy trunks without trucks, roads, or railroads? The account is in the first book of Kings, chapter 5. Solomon sent a message to Hiram, king of Tyre, requesting help. Hiram accepted the agreement, but the cost was high. Israel would pay annually 20,000 measures of wheat, more than 4 million liters, and 20,000 baths of oil, about 2 million liters. An astronomical amount, but Solomon knew without cedar there would be no temple. For this work, 10,000 Israelites were sent to Lebanon, working in shifts, 1 month in Lebanon and 2 months at home. The supervision was under Adoniram. These men climbed the mountains, working side by side with the Sidonian lumberjacks, specialists in felling centuries-old cedars. Skill was needed, as a mistake in the direction of the fall could destroy the trunk and kill workers. After the trunks were cut, the first stage of transport began: the sea. The lumberjacks tied the trunks to each other, forming large rafts, guided by smaller boats through the Mediterranean Sea. When they arrived at the port of Joppa, current Tel Aviv, there was still approximately 60 kilometers to Jerusalem. Each trunk weighed tons. The land transport used the same technique as the stones: smaller trunks as rollers, thick ropes, and hundreds of men pulling. In the end, every trunk that arrived in Jerusalem was one more piece in the puzzle of the greatest temple in history. Imagine the most imposing construction site of antiquity. Hundreds of men moving colossal stones, ropes stretched, trunks being repositioned. And yet what was impressive was not the noise, but the absolute silence. The first book of Kings, chapter 6, verse 7, records a rule that seemed impossible. And the temple, when it was being built, was built with stone finished at the quarry. so that no hammer or axe or any tool of iron was heard in the temple while it was being built. No sound of iron, no hammer blow echoed over Mount Moriah. This made the work 10 times more difficult. Every stone needed to leave the quarry ready for fitting. Every measurement had to be perfect. To make this possible, architects and master builders developed an ingenious system. Symbols were engraved on the stones, still in the quarries. Hebrew letters, numbers, specific signs, indicating the exact place of each block. Upon arriving in Jerusalem, it was only necessary to read the marking. The builders knew exactly where to position it, without the need to measure again or improvise. The environment was one of reverence and tension. Hundreds of men moved gigantic blocks in silence, using only wooden levers, wedges, and ropes. Every movement was calculated. A communication error and tons of stone could crush dozens of workers. There was no margin for carelessness. Therefore, 3,300 supervisors walked the construction site, watching, listening, checking every detail. Above them, 550 principal chiefs coordinated the project, answering directly to the king. It was a machine organized with rigid discipline. Why so much silence? The answer resides in the temple's purpose. It was the house of God, a sacred place where the Creator would dwell. The noise of iron tools was considered profane. God had ordered reverence from the beginning. Every stone placed was an act of worship. The silence was a constant reminder that this was not common work. It was the preparation of a space where heaven and earth would meet. Now imagine the spiritual impact on the workers. Day after day, moving colossal stones in silence. No loud singing, no sound of a hammer, only the creaking of the ropes, the muscular effort, and the responsibility of erecting the dwelling of the Lord. This forced silence transformed the labor into a continuous worship. Every drop of sweat was an offering, every rope pulled an act of faith. If the stones and wood were already impressive, what really set the temple apart was the shine. The Bible describes that 27 tons of pure gold were used only in the internal cladding. The Holy of Holies, the most sacred place, measured 9 meters long, 9 wide, and 9 high, and the entire space, walls, ceiling, floor, was completely covered with hammered gold. They were true gold plates, hammered and nailed onto the cedar wood. Imagine entering a place where everything reflects light, like being inside a miniature sun, a visible reflection of the divine glory. But who performed this work? Israel did not have enough specialists. Solomon summoned Hiram from the city of Tyre. The Bible presents him in the first book of Kings, chapter 7, as the son of a widow from the tribe of Naphtali, and a Phoenician father, an artisan in bronze, filled with wisdom and understanding and skill in working with all kinds of bronze work. Under his leadership, not only the gold, but also the bronze was worked to perfection. It was he who produced the 2 monumental columns, Jachin and Boaz, each 8 meters high and weighing 34 tons, and the great bronze tank for purification, sustained by 12 metal oxen. The process of working the gold was exhaustive. Furnaces burned day and night. The heat was unbearable. Men heated the gold until it became malleable and hammered it on stone anvils until forming thin and uniform plates. Thousands of plates were needed. The workers rotated, as no one could endure the heat for long. Many were injured, but continued, knowing that that work was unique. In the center of the Holy of Holies were the cherubim, each 4.5 meters tall, with open wings that touched the opposite walls. They were made of wood, but completely covered in gold, representing the divine glory and majesty. There, between them, the Ark of the Covenant would be placed. Where did so much gold come from? The first book of Kings, chapter 10, records that Solomon received annually 666 talents of gold, more than 22 tons, coming from tributes, mines, and gifts from other kings. A large part was destined for the temple. Altars, tables, utensils, everything shone. The entire temple was a work of art that united engineering, aesthetics, and spirituality. Its grandeur had a purpose, to reflect the glory of the eternal God. Every stone, every trunk, every plate of gold pointed to a single reality. The Creator had chosen to dwell among His people. One of the biggest secrets to the success was the military organization. There were 3,300 supervisors and 550 principal chiefs, totaling approximately 150,000 workers. Imagine the necessary coordination between quarries, distant forests, furnaces, and the central construction site. Every workfront needed to be in perfect harmony, and, impressively, in 7 years, the temple was concluded on schedule. In the 8th month of the 11th year of Solomon's reign, the last stone was set. Months later, during the Feast of Tabernacles, the inauguration occurred. All Israel gathered. Priests carried the Ark of the Covenant to the Holy of Holies, and then something supernatural happened. A cloud filled the temple, not common smoke, but the glory of the Lord. The divine presence manifested itself so intensely that the priests could not stand. The place, built with stone, wood, and gold, was now filled with the very Spirit of the living God. Solomon celebrated the inauguration with a monumental offering, 22,000 oxen and 120,000 sheep. Numbers that demonstrated reverence. The temple was not for human glory, but for the glory of the Creator. Solomon's temple was the greatest work of antiquity, not only because of the size or materials, but because of the silence, organization, and purpose, to be the dwelling of God. Hundreds lost their lives in the construction, but those who survived saw the impossible become reality. The message that the temple leaves us is that what seems impossible in human eyes, God makes possible. The temple was not just about gold and stones, but about the presence of the Lord filling the house. If this message is blessing you, take the opportunity now and subscribe to the channel. Activate the little bell to not miss any content, because here every week we delve into profound biblical stories. Your subscription helps us to take the Word of God even further. So, go ahead and subscribe and come walk with us on this journey.